afternoon, good evening, everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, what a joy it is for me to be back in this country, which is practically my own. I am from Iran originally, but I lived in Italy and I left a large piece of my heart here. So thank you very much for hosting us here in Milan and at the Triennale. So my guest this evening, as you all know, is Theaster Gates. He doesn't require much introduction, but I did want to mention that I had the pleasure of interviewing Theaster for the New York Times 3 years ago. If you have a subscription, which you should all have a subscription, you can look it up, not because it was my article, but because Theaster is a very eloquent man, and he had some very thoughtful things to say. And he had designed what some of you probably saw, this pavilion, this timber cylindrical pavilion called the Black Chapel, which was at the Serpentine Galleries in London. And it was a very beautiful edifice, and outside on the lawn, he had placed, listen to this, a bronze church bell, which he had rescued and salvaged from a Catholic church on the south side of Chicago, which had been demolished in 2014. The Black Chapel and that church bell, I think, illustrated very well what Theaster does, part of Theaster's art practice. He creates spaces of culture and contemplation from houses or churches or stores that have been shut down or that have fallen into disuse and disrepair. Theaster is also, of course, a master potter and ceramicist, and he's also a painter. Theaster, I wanted to welcome you to Milan and to the Art for Tomorrow conference.
Thank you very much.
A very warm welcome to you.
Thank you.
So, my first question is a bit of a surprise question, Theaster. I haven't told you I was going to ask you this.
Okay.
All right. Your hometown is very much in the news right now. There's a man from Chicago named Robert Prevost, who has just been elected Pope Leo XIV. When he was a boy, young Bob, that's what he was called, or should I say young Leo, regularly attended a Catholic church on the south side of Chicago where you live, Theaster. And that church was called the Church of St. Mary of the Assumption. And it wasn't far from that church where you got the bronze bell that you brought to London. So that church, the one that he attended as a kid, has fallen into disrepair now, as you know better than anyone. And according to the New York Times, a colleague of mine wrote a very good story, which you can also read on the New York Times just last week. And he said that this church was not in a very good state right now, and that there was even graffiti behind the altar. Now, I don't mean to put you on the spot, Theaster, and I realize that it's not your job to restore and refurbish the childhood church of Pope Leo XIV. But I did want to ask you how it feels, you know, to see someone who grew up going to church in your neighborhood on the south side of Chicago being elected Pope.
Well, your question, your story has a lot of good questions in it, and I think several of them are worth unpacking. If Bob went to church on the south side, this would have been middle 50s, thereabouts. So the south side that I live on is a very different south side than the one that he knew in the 50s. It's a south side of Chicago it had gone through a German wave in the 20s, an Italian wave in the 30s and 40s, and then it was open to a kind of poor immigrant community, poor whites. It was in advance of black folk really occupying parts of the south side like that, and when blacks came, later 50s, that was probably also the time when whites in the early 60s started to exit. It would have also meant that the Catholic community that really used the church in its economic come up to keep community, to keep tradition, and to keep religion as a kind of unifying agent for a core of people, that function of the church, the Catholic Church, dwindled and dwindled and dwindled. And at the same time that you had the dwindling of the constituency of the Catholic Church, blacks were moving in, and the Missionary Baptist Church and the Pentecostal Church was growing and growing and growing. So in a way, God wasn't dead, God was just morphing a bit.
Right. And so that community that he was a part of is no longer there, but that church that he went to every week is there.
Yes.
So what's happening to it?
I think that it's the occasion that the Catholic Church has a crisis in the United States, that fewer and fewer parishioners are going to church, and the Archdiocese has a new problem, which is in the absence of people who believe or people who attend, what do we do with these houses of worship? And 3 days ago, I was looking, if you go online, you can look at Archdiocese Real Estate Chicago, and a list of properties come up, and they tell you all of the churches. And
Does that one come up?
yeah,
How much is it?
$1.4 million, thereabouts.
That's not very expensive.
But it's also, these are campuses. So there's a nunnery, a rectory, a school, and a church. And the church is so in a way, how is it possible? Well, I know this now. The Archdiocese can desacralize a church, remove its artifice, and essentially take the Spirit of God out of the church, if you will. And then the building is left to be a building. Okay. In the same way that I'm staying at Portrait, which was an old seminary. It's desacralized and it's a very nice hotel. But I think that it also acknowledges the fact that there has been tremendous lack of investment in parts of the South Side, and the economic engines that used to live there, that kept Germans and Italians there, are no longer there for black folk who live there at 99% of the population.
And I mean, this election, historic election, may attract attention to that particular building, edifice, and place of worship. Anyway, let's move on and talk about you, and not just about Pope Leo.
It's a good question.
Thank you. I also, as I was saying earlier, a key part of your practice does involve taking over derelict buildings, collecting and redisplaying their contents, and they can be historic book collections, magazine and album collections, which you've retrieved from stores that used to be open and are not open anymore. And you turn these spaces into centers of culture, and it seems to me, so this is really not gentrification, it's kind of the opposite. You're restoring soul and spirit back to the community and back to these spaces. And so, very basic question, Theaster, why do you do this?
If we start with my art practice, I think that my practice, in order to be its best practice, it needs a good problem. And the problem that I gave myself was, what would happen if I stayed in a place, and as my desire for amenities grew and my capacity to take advantage of those amenities grew, if those amenities didn't exist in the neighborhood that I lived in, could I help in the creation of those amenities that I wanted? So rather than thinking about the South Side or the West Side of Chicago or any other city, Kassel, Germany, or St. Louis, wherever I've worked, rather than thinking of it as a place that has deficit, it's a place with latent, sleepy assets that people just haven't been invested in. And could I use my practice to make something happen? Let's say make something happen. And the making something happen could constitute what people call sculpture, or it could be a kind of land art, or it could be an intervention that to an economic developer could look like an economic development intervention. To the real estate developer, it could look like affordable housing. To the mayor, it could look like political positioning. But for me, it is the choice to use my capacity to solve a problem.
Okay, but the thing is, the people of some of the people in these communities, like the rest of us, they need to put bread on the table. And here comes Theaster Gates, creating archives, libraries, places where you can go and sing or dance or engage in community, cultural interaction. But the thing is, how is that going to help me put bread on my table?
The challenge that we had on the South Side is like a lot of cities. If people could afford to live in other places, there was enough infrastructure in my city where they could choose to always leave. So we didn't have the problem of gentrification, we had the opposite. If someone hit $60,000, they could then afford to live in another neighborhood. They hit $80,000, they could move from that neighborhood to another, 150, and so and so. So we always lost many of the smartest and most stable economically. So part of it was, how can these creative projects first signal to people that staying is an option? Staying is an option because we do have gardens, and we do have interesting places for live music. We do have wellness and fitness, and we are creating culture, right? Not just me, not me at all by myself. But there's a group of people who are actively building together, and that feels like a reasonable contribution. Not priestly, but a reasonable contribution.
Fair enough. Okay, we have a work by Theaster right here in this building in the exhibition that's currently on, which I invite you all to go visit. So Theaster, could you tell us a few words about that work?
Yes. So, Ettore Sottsa's.
Ettore Sottsa's, yes, the great Italian architect.
This architect, designer, thinker, tinkerer, one of the things that he had a kind of fondness for was the capacity, he called them Eastern people. But he's probably speaking to China, Korea, Japan, maybe Taiwan and the Philippines. But Eastern people had the ability to imbue materials with power. And he was talking about that differently from the way, say, in his essay, Italians might use terracotta to build roof tiles. But he was talking about the ability to create kind of spiritual energy within a thing. At the same time that I was learning about Sottsa, I was also spending time in Japan with a Japanese potter who made cups and bowls. But when you look at his archive, I had access to his archive, he was often looking to Italian, French, and German kind of modernism and moments of interesting design and creativity, including sculpture and painting. They were born around the same time, and I thought maybe there was a way through my practice that I could introduce these two souls who are, neither of them are on earth. I've never met either of them, but it seemed like Japan was speaking to the West and Sottsa was speaking to the East, and that the ground on the second floor would be an interesting place for them to meet. So I took all of Yoshihiro Koide's pots, all of the pots that he made over the course of his life, and the work is called Clay Corpus, and I basically had those pots hug the apartment of Ettore. That
sounds wonderful. Thank you. Unfortunately, we only have 11 minutes. I mean, it breaks my heart because I do love talking to Theaster, but hey.
That's really kind.
Theaster, I just wondered if you could now speak to us about a more general topic, which is on everyone's mind, which is the changing political landscape in the United States. I'm not going to add anything to that, but I just wanted to ask you what your, how things are with you and what you do in Chicago on the South Side and beyond.
This is a very, I didn't know you were going to ask me this question. But we all thought it was a joke until it wasn't. And in the way that the left talks about dismantling systems, it seems the right is very, very effective at dismantling systems. And the dismantling in the United States, it's affecting culture in a way that I never could have imagined it would affect it. Like, I can call friends and they say, I lost my job today. I can call another friend and they say, I lost my job yesterday. And this dismantling is something that has really emboldened me to imagine that one's life cannot be exempt from political participation. And that when one exempts themselves from political life, that it has tremendous consequence. So I don't really have much to say about leadership, as much as I believe that we must all continue to make the contributions necessary to support the communities that we believe in, and that if we were all doing a bit, that would be better than expecting that work to happen only at the top.
Yeah, and when we were speaking just backstage, you did say that things were stable, that your work that you do in the community in Chicago is stable right now.
It's stable because I knew that there was an end to certain kinds of, I knew that philanthropy and public funding has always been a precarious possibility. So one has to remain nimble, and one can't become fat off the possibility of philanthropy or government generosity. One has to remain rigorous in their belief that if something great is going to happen, it's happening because we have the ability to do this, not necessarily to do this.
Yeah. And there's also the question, in the last few years since the tragic passing of George Floyd, and before that with the hashtag #MeToo movement, we have seen the foregrounding of art by women. I mean, women, we're not a minority, we're half of humanity.
Yeah.
I did the math.
Yeah.
50% of humanity, women. I wrote a book about this, it's called Takedown, never mind. Anyway, so the thing is, women, okay, have been given opportunities they've never had. Really a lot on the back of the hashtag #MeToo movement, okay? And then with George Floyd, that precipitated also the foregrounding of extraordinarily great artists who happen to be non-white, non-European, non-white, and non-male, or male, but whatever, anyway. So now in this new landscape, we do see criticism of diversity and inclusion, very heavy criticism of it. And again, I'm not trying to have a political discussion with you, but unfortunately, even when we talk about art, these things come in. What does that mean for the ability of women or, artists who are not white, male, to be foregrounded? I mean, or, are we now so much part of the culture that we're okay?
There's something great in your question. You've articulated that from time to time, something happens that could be horrific, it could be great, it could be, but something happens that stirs people, or that moves people, or that precipitates a movement, that gives people a reminder that the world needs that participation. And I feel like the work that we're called to do as artists and creatives is to be a part of making those great moments happen. Because when I hear George Floyd's name, it's almost like we forget that he was a human being who was killed mercilessly. But what we remember is that he's the symbol of a movement. And I think we have to carry both. And in the absence, in the same way that we're talking about the decay of the Assumption, the Mary of the Assumption,
the church, yeah.
that George Floyd represents a kind of new martyr. And the gift of martyrdom is that it reveals for us the truth of power. And it stirs us. And so I hope that we could be a part of the creation of work that is not just about the generation of sales receipts and transactions and shit, but that we would be a part of something that has the potential to do more than the individual work for an individual person. It has the ability to move the world.
Excellent. I'm going to quote from the last interview I had with you, which was 3 years ago. And I asked you, Theaster, what about the issue of race in America? And this was 2022, the summer. And you said, there is progress, and that progress has always created war. I'm curious about the inevitable consequential violences that erupt when equity is at stake, and of course equity meaning racial equity. So what are your words now? What are your thoughts, Theaster, on that particular, on those words that you said to me 3 years ago?
The progress that has been made has generated tremendous fear. And that if we don't figure out the relationship between that powerful fear and our powerful love, if we don't figure out a measure of those things coalescing, we will see unseen violences between people. And that those violences will be the byproduct of the fact that a smaller and smaller group of people are really, really afraid that they will lose something that they feel is almost a spiritual inheritance of some sort. And that our inability to learn to play together and share means that no one is going to give up their power without violences, and people will become more and more disenfranchised, disheartened, and disheartened. And I think that disheartenedness may cause the revolutionary means necessary for change.
Wow. Great. Theaster, we're about to wrap up soon. And I wondered if there was anything else you would like to add before we bow out and say goodbye.
Yeah. I never expected that I would talk about politics at a design triennale in this way, but maybe the necessary conversations have to happen everywhere. And so while I love talking about the design of a chair, I want to talk about that. I want to talk about architecture and fashion. I also think that we can't have conversations without the truth of the political. So I'm happy that you asked me these questions, and also a little bit happy to be here. Thank you all very much.
Theaster Gates, I wanted to thank you so much for being with me on stage. Lucky me getting to speak to you today. Thank you. And thank you for allowing me to ask intrusive questions about the Pope and politics and things like that. But I am a journalist, you know, we do talk about the news. Great.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much.